All right, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Matt Atkinson, a Global Project Director here at Reuters Events Pharma. Today's webinar is Streamline Your Digital Go-to-Market Strategy for Specialty Products, and we're here to discuss how to optimize launch execution by integrating new technology and touch points. And we're having this conversation because a new era of digital transformation has arrived. An enriched spectrum of the digital and virtual world is at our fingertips for specialty product launches. And we know specialty launches are being driven by the rising influence of payers, declining access to physicians, intense competition, and a shift away from the one-size-fits-all approach to customer engagement and support. So how do you maximize launch success, differentiate your brand, and build rapport with providers and patients? You become a tech and touch point innovator. And that's what we're going to discuss here today. A quick bit of housekeeping. So this is an interactive webinar, so please ask your questions for the panel in the box below, and I will get to them as soon as possible. And we will send the recording through to all registrants on Monday. So if you have to leave, or if you really enjoyed this conversation and you want to share it with colleagues, look out on Monday for that recording, and you'll be able to use it as you see fit. Now, I know you didn't come here to hear from me, so I think it's about time I introduce my esteemed guests here. I want to thank them first and foremost for joining, but I will let them introduce themselves, and I'll start with Daphne, please.
All right. Hi, I am Daphne Earley, the Senior Director of Digital at ViiV. I am located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I live with my husband, 4 kids, 8 chickens, 2 crazy cats, and 1 super hyperactive dog, which really didn't seem that relevant until COVID, but now with all of us in one house, I'm telling you, it's quite a bit. I have been responsible for the last year for 3 product launches, and so have definitely been focused specifically on how do you do that in digital.
Thanks, Daphne. Carl, please.
Thanks for having me here, Matt. I'm Cal Patel. I'm CEO and co-founder of BrightInsight. My quick background: physician MBA by education, was in management consulting across pharma, med tech, payers, and providers for many years, both US and Europe. Then at Novartis in different sales and marketing leadership roles, and then at Amgen was head of corporate strategy, then global marketing lead for Enriched, and then really started focusing on the digital side. So I founded and led what we called Amgen Digital Health. So we did things like put Bluetooth into our main drug delivery device, ultimately getting the second ever connected combination product approved by FDA. We worked on various algorithms that we also took through regulatory bodies and then embedded into medical devices, EMRs, patient registries, basically to find patients that were misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, or undertreated, and to do that at scale through the leveraging of SAMs, software as medical device algorithms, and then other things related to YouTube and the other digital marketing approaches. And I was in telemedicine as chief commercial officer at Dr. Demand, and now, as I mentioned, leading BrightInsight. Our focus is really helping pharma and med tech companies build, commercialize, and scale regulated digital health offerings. And look forward to talking about what we're seeing in that space and how that's really driving brand expansion of brands from both a overall market and market share perspective.
Thanks. And Liz, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Gentry, Vice President of Specialty Solutions at OptimizeRx, a division focused on providing life science organizations tech-enabled solutions to help automate the patient journey for specialty medications. I started my career and even found my passion working for a subsidiary at Express Scripts focused on building and deploying patient support services such as hubs and nursing programs. I've also had the opportunity to work for both a large and small biotech organization on the West Coast, supporting 2 specialty brands, access, channel, and strategy efforts. And I'm excited to be here today, looking forward to the discussion. I also have a crazy dog, but I was telling Daphne I sent him to the daycare today.
Thanks, Liz. And we're going to jump into the discussion in just a second, but First, we're going to have we'll have a short presentation from OptimizeRx and give us a bit more about what we're going to talk about in just a second.
Right. Matt, let me know if I think you might be sharing your screen.
No, I can't see anything as yet.
So let's see.
Oh, we can see them now.
You can see it now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to thank Reuters for hosting this and also everybody that's on the line today. As Matt mentioned, I'm hoping to really set a framework that really kind of guides our conversation today. I think it's no surprise that specialty medications are on the rise, or we wouldn't be gathered here today to talk about how we can improve their launch effectiveness. But I'm so proud and inspired by our industry because even in a global pandemic, we saw 53 novel drugs come to market, with 21 of those being for first-in-class medications and 58% of those being for rare and orphan diseases. And for years, we've continued to observe this rise in specialty drug spend. And according to a report from CVS, we actually saw specialty drugs account for more than half of pharmacy spend last year. So it's very evident that we haven't taken our foot off the gas pedal to accelerate these breakthrough treatments to market. But the question is, have these products and will these products achieve launch success when we see statistics like these? Where more than 36% of US drug launches between 2012 and 2017 didn't meet sales expectations in their crucial first year on market. And there's a saying out there that you live with what you launch with, and that must be true because those that fell short, 70% of them continued to fall short in subsequent years. But for those that achieved success in that first year, 80% of them continue to meet or beat expectations onward. So the reality is, from a performance standpoint, we've been a little consistently inconsistent. But despite this, we haven't seen a big shift or a revolution or a transformation in how we're bringing these medications to market. But then 2020 happened, and we saw pandemic pivots ripple across our industry. But it was more than just a pivot. It was the push we needed to evolve, to adopt a digital-first approach and embrace new technology aimed at powering and transforming our launches. And through this transformation, we've witnessed a complete reshaping in how we're interacting and engaging with HCPs. And HCPs are indicating that this is the new reality. 87% of them saying they want either all virtual or a mix of both virtual and in-person meetings even after the pandemic hits. And another shift we've seen is on the importance many brand teams have realized of becoming present at the point of care, because HCPs have a significant appetite to receive information this way. And it makes sense. It's where they're spending 6 to 7 hours of their day. They're saying, hey, pharma, meet me here. Give me information in my workflow. And even before COVID-19, our industry was very laser focused of improving patient support services with technology solutions like electronic prior authorizations and mobile messaging. But what COVID-19 really did is it helped us as an industry articulate the value of those services to HCPs, with 82% of them saying they've seen pharma change what they communicate about to include support that meets their most pressing needs. So what does this mean? What's the positive in all of this? Well, because we're giving HCPs more tools to help monitor and support their patients, greater access to information on new products, they now have more time back in their day to learn about these products. We're seeing statistics like these, where nearly 4 in 10 HCPs report that their likelihood of starting patients on recently launched treatments actually increased since COVID-19. And an additional benefit to the accelerated adoption of these new digital channels and technology solutions, well, they're just adding more fuel to the already rich data sets that we now have at our fingertips to help us build and deploy real-world evidence solutions that are helping us get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time, measuring outcomes and demonstrating the value of interventions and treatments across the entire healthcare ecosystem. So I think we know we're saying goodbye to the traditional launch model, or at least some of us are ready to say goodbye. But I think the question we all still have is, what does this new launch model look like? But the reality is that it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach again. because this new virtual world allows us to personalize, customize, be more flexible and targeted than ever before. So we're seeing brands begin to reimagine the environment and adapt solutions to it. And it's looking something like this. It's no longer just focusing on HCPs and payers. No, the patient is in. The patients are so much more informed and engaged in their healthcare that they are a critical stakeholder moving forward. Promotionally, we're not just standing up large sales forces focused on face-to-face relationship building. No, we're adapting a digital-first approach. Our teams are becoming account-based with specialty characteristics in reimbursement and clinical education. And as we're meeting with payers and PBMs, we're not just talking about price. We're talking about value, outcomes, real-world evidence. And as we're designing our patient support programs, it's not a one-size-fits-all call center and hub. No, we're looking at tech-enabled solutions, self-service platforms, personalized content, on-demand support and services. And internally, we've taken a look in to say, we can't have these brand silos and these silos within the brand. Because we're obtaining so much information from our customers, our programs, our products, we're building centers of excellence teams and customer experience centers. So it's a very, very exciting time to be launching a specialty medication because of this new reimagined environment. But it also might feel a bit overwhelming. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Matt, because I think it's a good idea for us to dive deep to provide additional insight into how specialty brands are navigating this new environment and taking advantage of it to achieve launch success.
Thanks, Liz. I would like to come to our audience now. So we're going to launch a poll. You should see the come up in front of you now. I'm going to leave that open for a minute while I come to our panelists as well. Is all that change necessary? I can understand for some of those brands that are struggling, but you still do see success from there that are able to achieve growth. So why can we no longer afford to continue with that traditional model once lockdowns are lifted, and perhaps some of them can go back to that old way of working? Why should they continue with this change as well? And I'll leave that for someone to jump in.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in. I think, the key thing for me is looking at my own behavior, right? So you start to think, I love what Liz actually said as she was walking through that presentation, because I could see like, these are the changes that someone else kind of pushed on us, but if each of us reflect on our own, we can also see how we've changed, right? And so our expectations have changed. I will now know better where I can find resources, how I can find resources, because my children, for example, they were in front of TVs more, they were in front of computers. I have seen them leapfrog into what they can do. And HCPs, patients, they're in the same boat. We're not all going to go back. There is no going back. There's only going forward to a new normal. And that's really what we have to be focused on, is what is that new normal? I think Liz put it really well where she said, expectations are that you have these types of engagements as well as engagements that are in person. It's no longer enough to just expect that in person is going to be enough. Now you have to expect that all the other channels are in play. And if you're not in those channels, then you're losing your competitive advantage. That's the bottom line. So if you go back, you really are stepping back and losing your competitive advantage that you've gained over this time.
And just to add to that, I totally agree with what Daphne's saying. The other thing we're seeing, Matt, is the basis of competition is beginning to change, right? So and COVID has obviously accelerated that, but now we're working with so many brands across, top 20, top 30 pharma companies that are thinking about, hey, when we bring our product to market, what's for example, the companion app or algorithm that's going to come with it? And this is not the traditional marketing app that, you spend 6 months on and you kind of have in the market and there's no back end, no data, and you kind of forget about it. We're talking about, things that are much more around the digital equivalent of the PSP, right? Like you're engaging the patient, you're actually helping them collect real data that's going to be used in conversations with their physicians. It's integrated into the PSP program. You might even have algorithms, for example, that could put you into the software as medical device space, but algorithms that might do things from personalized drug dosing, personalized adherence, et cetera, right? A lot of this stuff isn't in the market today, but I can tell you it's coming. And so I think the basis of competition is going to really start to shift. And maybe the last note I'll add on it is, you kind of play that through, it starts with better engagement of the patient or the provider, but ultimately people are now thinking about data and using that to drive better outcomes and better interactions. That data will then become available on the payer side, right? Because then you'll walk up to the payer and say, hey, look, our label, it's not just the traditional basis of how you compete for your spot on the formulary and the financials, but also now bringing real world data to argue for your price or your position.
I think the one thing I'll add there too is, as an industry, we've been very committed of being customer centric. And I think what's happening right now with these digital solutions is our customers are adopting them, our patients, our HCPs. And so if we want to be a customer centric industry, we have to continue to not only adopt, but continue to provide them new solutions that are meeting them where they want to be met.
That's a very good point, Liz. I'm going to end our poll now and share the results. They should pop up in front of your screen again. So for those who aren't viewing but are listening in, how advanced are you in streamlining your digital launches? 15% are saying they haven't started planning. 36% say they're in the planning stages. 15% say they're about to launch. 28% say they've completed a launch and now optimizing the process, and 6% say we've completed multiple launches and have developed an end-to-end process. Anything to comment on there? Do you think that marries up with what you see in terms of where people are in their planning stages for digital launches?
I would agree. I think one of the things that I've been really excited seeing is the innovation mindset is starting to flow again. Like, people are very intrigued about trying different things. And I think that's probably going into this planning stage, is people are searching for what's new out there. What are those new solutions, those new ways that I can integrate into my launch? And so I think that that's kind of showing where we're at right now.
Liz, I might stick with you for just a second. I know we've touched on quite a bit already, and most obviously we're talking about the new ways of working for HCPs. Have you seen point of care strategies change and how companies are leveraging this channel to help drive utilization of patient support services?
Well, I mean, the point of care strategy has evolved from just a marketing tactic to a complete marketing channel strategy. I mean, before the pandemic, specialty brands were leveraging the EHR as a tactic to build awareness of financial support programs and even therapeutic brand messaging. However, you're now seeing point of care strategies become more than just about building awareness, but they're actually becoming an activation channel. We actually have life science organizations who are leveraging the EHR to allow HCPs to engage with a rep or an MSL within workflow, as well as working with them to embed the enrollment form into their patient support programs within their EHR workflow. This is not only helping streamline that process, but it's actually helping remind them that these programs actually exist at the point of prescribing. I think there's an industry stat out there that says only 1 in 5 patients are even aware of patient support programs, and the majority of them rely heavily on HCPs to inform them. So if we can continue to increase the utilization of the EHR channel, we're just going to improve that trend, because it's going to make sure HCPs are aware that these support services are available, because we're meeting them where they are, we're streamlining it, and we're creating more awareness.
Daphne, I might come to you now as well. Expectations of digital have changed drastically. Channel and content being the obvious. How have you seen those change in your role? How are you changing to meet those evolving expectations as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I mean, when we really start to think about the landscape pre-COVID and now, there's a pretty radical shift in terms of just our use. So if you look at YouTube usage, for example, it's gone up 400%. And a lot of the people who are actually using YouTube are searching the same way that they're searching on Google, right? So they're searching for health solutions, they're searching for their different medicines, they're trying to find the answers there. And then if we also look over at Facebook, social media, you see that all of these things have spiked, right? And at the same time, the ability for us to actually reach out and directly talk to HCPs has radically decreased. So one of the tactics that we've been working on is trying to make sure that we're in all of the obvious places and we're meeting them where they're at. I think Liz brought up a great point. Like, if you can no longer meet someone at the office, then you have to figure out, like, where else are they? And they may not be where you traditionally thought, or they might be in some of those spots, some of those channels that you have traditionally thought were only for the consumer, right? So now you have to think of HCPs as just people. The providers are looking to, find solutions. They're trying to figure out the easiest way to do that. And I think the other big piece that we have seen is simplicity matters. I can't express that enough. I think that so often people get caught up in trying to deliver the entire message at one time in one channel, rather than realizing that over and over again on multiple different channels, they have the opportunity to stage it, to actually move people through the customer experience, to help them understand at different points, like, this is what the medicine is about. And then here are more of the benefits. And it doesn't have to be all immediate to get to that point, because the HCP, the patient, they're going to see those ads over and over again. And if you're in all the right channels, it will totally change the way that they perceive that.
I have a question here from Well Duden, who says, what are the market segments archetype that will benefit most from this digital transformation, and which will be the least? HCPs versus patients versus payers, rural versus urban, high rivalry versus low rivalry. Where are you seeing the digital transformation have the biggest effect, I guess, in terms of your market segments and archetypes?
I would say, honestly, it's across the board. I think that if you just go and you zoom into one of those, you're kind of missing the point. The pandemic has impacted all of us, and it's radically shifted our behavior, our ability to actually reach out, have great conversations, engage, joke around a little bit, right? And so it's going to be the companies that figure out how to play in that space, not just drive point end-to-end transactions, but actually delight the customer. We're talking about meeting them in those channels, but the other element is really us being able to connect with them at a different level. And I think patients being able, for example, to really connect with people is something that you're going to see really play out in the next few months as we start to come out of the pandemic. You could even see it in ads over the last few months when there wasn't the opportunity to actually do live events or to do live commercials or to record any of those things because of COVID. And so there is an element of human touch that we have been missing, and the digital channels are going to re-engage in those interactions. And I think they're also going to deliver a whole new level of services that, Cal was talking a little bit about, but I think is really going to start taking us to the next level of, rather than it being a digital launch versus an in-person launch, it is a launch in every channel.
Yeah, I would echo that, given the, as Daphne said, we're working on more wraparound solutions, if you will, digital solutions, not just digital channels, right? Like algorithms, apps, connected drug delivery devices, et cetera. When we started BrightInsight sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we thought that there would be a much higher focus for segments like diabetes, obesity, sort of chronic care type of stuff, but actually we're seeing it across the board. So we right now have active programs with pharma companies in diabetes, obesity, neurology, ophthalmology, hematology, oncology, respiratory, just off the top of my head, right? So it's really covering that whole spectrum from diseases that affect a large part of the population in a chronic way, all the way to now we're actually just getting to areas like gene therapy and sort of, very, very micro segment, and high value types of therapy. So I think that's right. The future is, it's not where you focus, but it's how do you leverage these capabilities across the portfolio.
Cal, I might stay with you for just a second. And can you give me an example of where you've used real-world data and digital channels to introduce provider and patient support? You know, to a little bit further, what are the companions that those on the webinar today should be looking at commercializing with launches, and should this extend beyond a marketing app? And I'm going to launch a poll to see what they're doing right now as well.
Yeah, great question. Let me give two examples. One's public and one is not public, so I'll have to keep it de-identified. We announced a couple of months ago with AstraZeneca that they launched what's called the Amaze platform, and this is a disease management platform, unbranded to a drug that AstraZeneca is, developing and bringing to market. They actually did a separate press release with Mass General, the Harvard hospitals there, where they have integrated, right? So what we've done with BrightInsight, we've built this platform, we've integrated it into the EMR, so directly into the clinical workflow. So there's no secondary sign-on, there's no going to a portal. It's literally right there, the way a physician would see their lab data or any other data in their EMR. And then on the other side of it, there's a patient-facing app, right? And what essentially what the solution is doing is it's letting physicians and care teams, it's letting care teams and patients have the connection, the ability to communicate relevant data in between all of the visits, right? So you think about, them managing these patients with chronic issues. Now they have a means to do that, both bringing in clinical data that can help the physician side, the provider side, triage and know where to focus, but then also enabling the direct communication, and then obviously escalating that to an in-person visit. So, so they've started with something that's quite compelling, but have a really, broad vision of expanding that across more and more sort of capabilities and functionality, but also, deeper and deeper penetration. And what I love about what they did there is, they started by saying, look, for us to be successful on the provider side, we have to think about how do we directly integrate into the workflow of the provider. And that's something I think that's often overlooked. Then a second example I'll give is on the oncology side. So again, to my point, going from like big populations to much smaller ones, right, we're seeing a ton of stuff in the immuno-oncology and broader oncology space in regards to digital. So as one example, a lot of patients that are in the CAR T category, but it applies to other immuno-oncology areas as well. There's a common, relatively rare, but potentially catastrophic side effect called cytokine release storm. And so your body's having this immense immune reaction to the therapy, and folks have died from that, right, in clinical trials as well as, the real world. And the best biometric signal we have today is a thermometer. People go home with a $2 Walgreens thermometer. It's quite crazy, right? We have this like game-changing therapy that all in costs, $1.5 million, and you send somebody home with a $2 Walgreens thermometer and say, monitor your temperature 4 times, a day. And so now we're seeing multiple companies actually move into, you send them home with a wearable, right? Every 2 seconds, that wearable is sending data to an app that, for example, is coming to the BrightInsight backend. And then you have some fairly simple algorithms, right, that are looking for how fast is their temperature changing from that patient's personal baseline temperature, as well as obviously meeting a threshold of, let's say, clinical fever. And then there you can then enact the intervention, right, both to the patient, to a caregiver, to the oncology team, et cetera, depending on how they want to be notified. And then you result in a further assessment, right? And so the strategies we're seeing there is, again, how do you do this without slowing up the commercialization of the therapy, right? So the therapies still come with their primary safety label, which is use the traditional thermometer, but then you can do a secondary safety device, right, with a solution like this that you can get to market at the same speed or right behind that. And what we're seeing is companies are saying two things, right? So from a commercial perspective, one is how do we not only compete on efficacy, but now how can we differentiate on safety, right? And so how do you go to the oncologist and say, look, our drug, or it's not drug, right? Our solution, here's its efficacy profile vis-a-vis competitors, but look at how we're differentiating on the safety side, right? So that's how they're trying to change the competition, or the differentiation versus competition. And then the other thing they're thinking about is how do we get these complex therapies out of just academic medical centers and tertiary care centers, and to get more community oncologists to start adopting these innovative therapies. well, again, you're going to have to address, this fundamental safety concern in this class of therapies that community oncologists will have, where they just don't have the same expertise and resources when they see this as a means to do that, right? So it's things that, again, start with like, oh, we're just replacing the Walgreens thermometer with a wearable, but that's sort of a very simplistic way to think about it, right? That's the shiny object way to think about it. These are actually very strategic programs to massively expand market and differentiate versus competitors, and in CAR T space, which is massive amount of pipeline, therapies in market and coming there. So hopefully those help you see some of the stuff that we're working on and we're seeing a lot of companies move into.
Yeah, Cal, I love what you were talking about that, because when you think about it, you can start thinking about like all of the customer experience pieces that Liz was mentioning, how that is getting more built out, right? And so when we really start to think about it, it's like, here are all of the really essential moments that matter, and how do we start to pull those through with real data that we can actually truly act on and make people's lives better. It's not, it fundamentally is changing how we're looking at health and how we look at what we do. And I think that for me is something that I love hearing the two examples you gave. I thought they were really fabulous for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I just add one more point that you triggered for me, on the CAR T example, and on all these, it's really important that you have a cross-functional team, right? These are not R&D efforts and they're not marketing efforts, right? You got to break down those silos and think, like you said, about what are we solving for our end user. And so in this CAR T example, right, like the clinical people are obviously, as they should be, are thinking about what's the temperature that matters, how do we baseline it, what wearable should we use, what's the algorithm going to do, how's the FDA going to think about it? Great. But then we also need the marketing people there, right? And so on the commercial side, the conversations we're having is, how do you have this be a Nordstrom or an Apple kind of experience, right? Here's somebody who's diagnosed with with cancer. They're going into this amazingly hopefully life-saving therapy, but it's a scary experience and all that stuff, right? And so you don't just send them a wearable and say, hey, put this on, or they get it slapped on in the hospital. Like, how should this show up a week or two before that, right? And they get right. How do you build the dominoes tracker of the experience of saying, hey, here, you donated we harvested your immune system cells. Here's how we're literally, you can literally give somebody a dominoes tracker on how their therapy is being custom developed from their own cells and how they're going to get infused. So, you got to think that way from a marketing perspective, to your point around how do you take something as horrible as cancer, combine it with this innovative therapy, but then create an experience that really, frankly, if Domino's can do it when you're ordering a $7 pizza or whatever it is, we got to be able to do it at $1 million, therapy that's about life and death, and really deliver that kind of experience, right? And so the best teams that we work with anyway, actually have that, where yes, there's leadership from one side or the other, but it's really a joint effort between the marketing organization and the clinical development organization.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I can also see, you were talking a little bit about kind of the data element right there. And I think that's, for us, that's really been key in figuring out like who actually we should be kind of going after, as well as like how can we actually deliver the medicine to those people? Because sometimes the data can be a little bit challenging, as I'm sure you know, or sometimes there are problems with actually collecting the data. Have you guys, as you've been working through these, how key do you find like actually getting that data is, and in kind of transforming that experience?
Oh, it's super critical. It all starts with having your data strategy in place from the beginning, right? And that's a key part of our value proposition with BrightInsight, is that we're turnkey with all the data backend infrastructure, with the proactive privacy security stuff, right? Whether it's HIPAA or GDPR or high trust 9.3 and so forth. So you got to similarly, right, think about your data strategy from the get-go, right? And what data do you want to collect? What do you want to be able to do with that data? Because that also gets into, right, both your consent and what you put in that consent, right? You can't show up afterwards and be like, oh, I found this great use of the data and you didn't think about it. So you want a consent that's going to broad, right? You see from your reaction, right, that you appreciate that. And then also from a clinical intent, right? A lot of times folks will say, oh, we're collecting this great data, and they're thinking about kind of the marketing or experience use of the data, but they're not thinking about, or maybe even like the payer side use of the data, but they're not thinking about, well, hey, just because it's post-approval data, you could actually have a lot of clinical and regulatory and FDA or whatever country benefit with that data, because you could use it to perhaps enhance your label later, or you can use that to build an algorithm. You don't have the data to build some interesting algorithm today, but as you start collecting the data, maybe in the future, you can do some personalized drug dosing or adherence or whatever else, right? And if you don't set that up the right way from the get-go, then you're not going to be able to use that data in the future that way, because you didn't have the right, sort of procedures and validation of the data, et cetera, for clinical use in the future. It's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because we've definitely seen that in our launches.
I'm going to share the results from our last poll now. So it was a multiple choice answer. So you'll see, what digital companions are you currently exploring and or commercializing? 33% are looking at a diagnostic app, 47% a marketing app, 49% adherence app, and 33% looking at a digital therapeutic. Obviously, probably a few more answers that we could have had there, but Cal, advice for those who are looking at some of those different options, what would be your advice for those who are looking at just a marketing app right now?
Yeah, a couple of key things. So it's really interesting data there. So first is I look at diagnostic and digital therapeutic for sure, but likely on the adherence one and maybe the marketing one as well, is to really take that approach of, first of all, you want to have a back end, right? Coming to the data side, like I just don't see it in this day and age, like why anybody would build an app that you're not collecting the data back to your back end cloud, and because you want to be learning from that data, right? And again, when I was in Emerald, we didn't do that, but that was a different point in time, right? So you got to think about the ability to collect that, right? So now you're thinking privacy and security, of course, and being able to build and deploy that, right? The second piece is, how do you think about that ultimately, what's your intended use of that data? So again, something I already touched upon, and we don't see, a lot of times people will miss that piece. And so in the specific area within there is, folks will start often in a unregulated app or solution, right? Which, the first three often can be. But I think you want to think about over time, how could I actually move to a level of personalization and intervention that will likely make you to be regulated, so software as a medical device. And that's a good thing, because you're moving up the value chain of the kinds of value you can drive for the user, and that'll move you into the regulated space. So don't be scared of the regulated space. Have that intent in mind. Just start building in a way. It'll cost you more to do it, but that's how you're going to really drive value. So you collect the right data, and you collect in a way where you can drive a regulated intended use. You build your entire software end-to-end under a quality management system. So again, not typically what marketing is doing, but I think that's why you want to partner with the right, external partners and the R&D and device side of the company to build it as a software as medical device. And then thirdly, I think the global piece, a lot of, I know it's always a trade-off, but a lot of money gets spent at country level solutions, whereas I think taking a more global uses, especially as you're now collecting data from users, you can get a lot of insights if you standardize at a global level. Obviously US could always be an exception given the size of the market here, but if you're thinking like in Europe, try to do a pan-Europe solution or global one versus just, Germany or France as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Cal, I have a question around, I just feel like putting back my industry hat on, adherence has always been the item that we've always tried to solve for.
Yeah.
Like it's always been a challenge, and I feel like we've invested a lot and we never really get a return on that outcome. Do you feel, I have an opinion on this, but do you feel like with the real world evidence that we actually have better insights to understand why patients are, falling off therapy versus we would build apps and, reminders that really weren't really meeting patients where they are? How have you seen that change as we get more granular with our adherence solutions?
Yeah, great question. I think we're exactly at that inflection point right now, to both of your guys' point, right? We come from this like generic reminder, right? And think about anything in our life. Like if you're getting a generic reminder, an email or whatever about something, you're largely going to ignore it or find it annoying. And so to tell somebody something generic related to adherence just doesn't, it helps, but doesn't help very much, right? So that's kind of the historical industry experience. And then think about, again, our lives from a digital perspective. Like the most effective digital engagements we have are ones that are personalized, and so they understand our behaviors and what makes us tick and what will make us take an action, and then they personalize around that action, right? And so it comes to being able to collect that data at the front end, bring all that to the back end, being able to analyze that, and over time just get smarter and smarter, right? And so to really have this like tech-driven MVP approach, right? How do you get something out that really is that minimal viable product? So don't expect your first version of your adherence app or your app, to be changing adherence by 10%. You should just be going for, hey, for the next, like our first release and for like the first 3 releases after that, we should just be only focused on how do we get users to just use our solution and keep using it for 6 months. I'm making it up, right? But like focus on getting actual engagement of your digital solution. So don't try to solve adherence, try to solve for engagement with, how do you create a compelling enough experience and value to the patient? And then you start weaving in, right, over time, things like, getting better and better at trying to drive adherence, right? Because the typical approach is the one and done. Or we put something out on the market, we've checked the box, our brand has an app, and we move on, right? And it's like you literally don't know. We have another customer. I'll just give you a quick anecdote here. Right, another customer who had one of those apps. The current marketing team didn't even know their product had an app that a previous generation marketing team had put out there. It came up in a market research study. So we actually rebuilt that entire app under a quality management system, but importantly with a back end. So now we, swapped it out in the app store, migrated everybody, who was using the old app to the new app. And so now for the first time, the pharma company actually knows, okay, we got X thousands of users of the app. Now they're collecting literally hundreds of thousands of data points on how patients are changing injection sites, when are patients doing injections? So not a surprise, but nobody does injections on Friday evenings, right? But the marketing team always is like, holy cow, like we didn't know any of this. So this is real world. This is not like us spending $500,000 and taking 6 months to do a market research study, which we know has its limitations. This is like, they're literally getting real world, real time, instantaneous data on how users are engaging with the digital product, right? And at this point, they're not trying to drive adherence. They're literally just trying to think about features and functionalities that keep their users engaging on the digital solution, and then over time, right, they're going to ladder up to, okay, well, how do we now use this data to think about personal ways to improve adherence? So it's all about personalization. And by the way, a lot of personalization will put you into being regulated, right? Because what the FDA will say, we had this experience at Amgen with Enbrel. If you tell somebody, if you're using, let's say, a connected drug delivery device, and you tell somebody, hey, you forgot to take your drug because you didn't get a signal back from that device, well, that's a regulated intended use, because if your system failed and now you're telling, Mrs. Smith to take a second dose of her immunosuppressive drug, well, that's a safety risk, right? So this is the type of stuff that, again, I don't think you can be scared of. You just have to do it the appropriate way. But now you think about the power of that, right? Like you can literally congratulate Mrs. Smith for taking her therapy, and then when she misses it, she's going to pay attention, because and you can even intervene. You can elevate that to your patient support program or call center, et cetera, right? To proactively reach out to say, did your insurance change? Did you travel and you forgot to carry it with you? What happened? Did your doctor tell you to stay off because you're getting some dental work?
I think when you're talking about that, though, I think that's exactly that's what in everybody's mind is that fear, right? And I think you're totally right of I think there are a couple key elements that you were totally hitting on that we've actually done, which is start small, test a little bit in a safe space, figure out how to grow adoption. Once you start getting that, then move on to the bigger pieces. But I think you're absolutely right in saying don't be afraid of kind of laddering up. I think what I see is exactly what you're talking about, is that people start off with this grand notion and it paralyzes them. And so then you really have to get down to that little piece. How do we start working there? Where do we roll something out and test it in such a way that it's safe? And then also that really adds value, right? That's the key thing, because they're not going to adopt it if there isn't some value to them. And I think, Liz, even when you were talking earlier, you were talking about how people have integrated into the point of care, little elements that that add value to the HCPs. And so like if you have to start at a starting point, I always think like the best starting point is, again, going back to that customer journey, figuring out like where you can add the most value and then also add the most business value. There's like a sweet spot somewhere in there between the patient and between like, you know, your business. And then I always like to say it's like our job as like digital innovators is to figure out how to connect those two and really create a heart, right? And create like the perfect connection between those two elements. I think when I worked at IBM, that was like one of our main things was like in doing digital transformation is you really had to focus on where is the value add that we can add and where is the value add for them so that it can actually come together. Because what I see with a lot of apps that fail is that nobody answers, they answer the business desire,
Right.
but they totally forget about the patient or any value add for them. And then they're wondering, well, why don't they want to use our app? And it's like, of course they don't want to use your app. There's nothing in it for them. There's nothing for them to win with. Yeah.
Liz, I want to come to you in just a second, but I'm going to launch a poll. So you'll see it in front of you. What digital solutions are you planning on investing into? You increase utilization of your patient support programs at launch, digital enrollment within the EHR, SMS, mobile messaging, digital companions, or automated hub services. And then I want to ask you a similar question around how have you seen technology and digital solutions transform the design of patient support programs for specialty medications?
I mean, Cal was touching on it. I mean, pharma doesn't have to design these programs as a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, by leveraging digital solutions, AI, real-world evidence, machine learning, they now have the ability to personalize content and services depending on where the patient is on their treatment journey and depending on how the patient wants to be engaged with themselves. I mean, we all are consumers. And because of the advancements in technology and the attention our industry is actually placed on the EHR channel and building connectivity and automation within workflow, we're actually starting to see a huge shift in the model. It's, in the past, you know, we would see specialty brands direct HCPs out of workflow, send the prescription and patient enrollment into a hub via fax, you know, the 1970s technology that we all can't seem to get away from, who would then eventually help get the script to the specialty pharmacy. But now we're working with our pharma partners to not only help provide those digital solutions within and outside of the EHR to streamline enrollment, but we're working with their hubs and their pharmacies to build a more connected service ecosystem. And that's not only helping automate a lot of these manual steps along the specialty journey, but it's providing that visibility to all stakeholders, which is helping reduce the duplication of work. It's getting patients to the specialty pharmacy much faster. And the reason why that is because now you can actually focus your hub on those patients who don't go down the happy path, those patients that truly need that high touch support. So we're actually starting to see improvements in speed to therapy, a concept that we have talked about for years as a problem. We're seeing improvements in that because we're building a more continuity of care system due to this more connected and automated service ecosystem that, you know, we're really pushing the industry towards.
And I will come to the poll answers now as well. So we have 28% digital enrollment within the EHR, 21% SMS mobile messaging, 38% digital companions, and 14% automated hub services. And that probably comes as no surprise, as we've talked extensively about digital companions and the growing that growing area. So I'm going to stop sharing those now, and I want to come back to you, Daphne. We've got about 10 minutes left and we've got a couple more questions. So I want to get to this one. So talking about digital launches and streamlining the model, but where do we start? Where does someone who's here, you know, they've listened to the end, they want to know, where do we start? Is it about retooling the sales force, introducing some new technology system, or should we think about it, this is more of an end-to-end process with different elements? We've just heard about working on it all at once in a specific part of the business and then scaling.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think really when I look at it, rather than looking at it from what do you do internally, I always like to start from the customer viewpoint. And that really for me is like, where can you add value the fastest, right? So When you look at the customer journey and you map those things out, if you are feeling that there are a lot of pain points because now you cannot get in to see the HCPs to explain to them the value of your medicine, then maybe what you do is you start looking at programs. You look at different options for how do you deliver that same content, those same services, or like Cal was talking about, if there's this pain point and you've identified that pain point, then how do you work an app into your solution so that it actually pulls through? Whereas Liz was talking about, when she was talking about the centers of excellence, it really comes back to looking at the HCPs, looking at your patients, mapping out the pain points. A lot of people want to say, well, you know, the customer journey, there are like 3 million points, right? But really what you need to do is focus in on the ones that truly matter, because there are a lot of different things that will add up, but the ones that really matter, where they have friction, where it stops them from moving forward, where it prevents them from getting quality care, those are the ones that you want to zoom in on and figure out, like, how do you do this differently? How do I make sure that an HCP knows that this medicine is available to a patient based upon certain data, right? How do I get to them if I no longer can meet with them in person? Do I do it through a Zoom meeting? Do I do it through a ViiV exchange? Like, how do I have that conversation? Do I set up a program for them to attend? You know, are there different ways? A couple of examples that we've actually implemented on our websites were actually the opportunity for people to engage with a chatbot, so they can ask the chatbot several different questions and get answers. We've also have a form where they can actually request assistance to connect to a sales rep or to a medical liaison. So there are different options, but you have to be a little creative and look at those key points where they're not able any longer to really maximize their opportunities and to move. Wherever they're having friction, that's where you want to solve for. And that's where your sales force hopefully is solving for as well. And rather than looking at it as a totally different channel, they're running into the same problems. You can help them as well use all the different channels that are available to really reach out. And rather than think of it as, is it digital or not? Think about it as, are they connecting or not?
I have an audience question here that I would like to get to, and Liz, come back to you. It says, what are the impediments to providing direct pharma info resources to EHR systems, and how might these be overcome, even with, in brackets, even with national health systems that are often use multiple systems that don't always connect?
I mean, the EHR space is a very fragmented space. It is. I think, you know, one of the things that OptimizeRx has really tried to do is augment that to really help our pharma partners navigate that space. But you have to also think about, this is a channel where you could be very targeted. So it's not about a capture where you just kind of throw a dart and hope something, you know, sticks. This is where you can be very laser focused. And so that's one way of leveraging that channel. You can bring in real world evidence to even get that targeting messaging to the right customer at the right time. And I think the other ways is looking outside of what are things I can do outside of the EHR that actually feels like the HCP is still in workflow. And so that's how we're addressing it. I think the one thing I will say is, as an industry, what I have observed is everyone really cares about improving this experience for HCPs and patients. We all, you know, share that same common goal. And so I think, you know, our EHR channel partners are also sharing that common goal. So I think it's going to get, you know, less fragmented, but it, you know, that's why you should, you know, look at partners that can really help you navigate that space.
Mm-hmm. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to get one more poll in from our audience. So I'm just going to pull it up now and launch it in front of you. What is the most important aspect to your digital launch model currently? So value-driven content, understanding customer profiles and behaviors, ensuring reps have the skills to engage virtually, ensuring we have a cross-functional strategy and aligned on delivery, building awareness and utilization of patient support programs. And if I don't have an answer in there that should be there, because I could imagine there's probably multiple that I've missed off, then please pop it in the chat function below, and I'll make sure that that gets a mention as well when we get to the results in just a second. So a lot of what we've spoken about today has kind of been not necessarily the technical perspective, but it's been the execution of it. It's been how are we driving this, how are we leveraging this technology or this data. But on the back of that has been a massive change within the industry, and with that comes a change in ways of working and a change of mindset. What's been the most important aspect from all your perspectives in terms of being able to make that change of ways of working, that mindset, that change management process, to get your organization on the same page and to begin leading through all of this so that we can come out the other side of a pandemic and actually be delivering in the way that we've spoken about today, but even further on as well. And I'll just leave somebody to start off that as well.
I mean, I'll go. I think, digital and technology solutions, they allow us to test, learn, adapt, and evolve. And I think as an industry, we really love to know that something works before we try it. But the reality is sometimes we aren't going to know how well something is going to work because it's new, it's innovative. But we can't afford to approach our commercial launch strategies with this fear or hesitation mindset. We're an industry who does a really, really good job on our R&D side with innovation. And we really need to bring that over to the commercial side because our patients and our HCP customers are going to expect this of us now. They're going to expect us to evolve our support, evolve how we're launching these medications and how we're engaging with them. And so it's time for us to kind of take a look in the mirror and say, we can do things differently. I know that we're a very regulated, space, but it's okay. We can think big and we can figure out how to navigate that together.
Yeah, Liz, I love that. I love the thinking big part. I think, for me, it's the element of courage, right? So you're in this situation and really the question is at this time, are you going to step back or are you going to step up? Right. And that is the question that, I challenge my team. I challenge the leaders that are around me to really ask is like, at this time, what is the risk if we do this? And what is the risk if we don't? And I think that that's really where, starting small, figuring out how to scale it, that makes the risk minimal to begin with. And then when you see your wins, it's just so easy to build on top of those and make it into something that really is incredible. And I think that's the thing that having not been in pharma for 20 years, but having come from a digital background, that's the thing that I think that pharma really can focus in more on. As you said, we are very regulated, but there's no reason that we can't think small, scale, big. There's so many opportunities there.
Step back or step up. That's fighting talk, Daphne. I like it. And Cal.
Yeah, I'm respectful of time here. I'll give a super quick comment. So first of all, I think perfectly said by Daphne and Liz. Look, I think there's going to be those folks and those companies that are coming out of the pandemic. They'll say, okay, how do we get back to what we used to do? And they're not going to be the winners in this role. I think that there's those that are going to say, well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is this generated the momentum, got the senior management and senior executives focused on the criticality of digital, and now we use that as a momentum. Pandemic or no pandemic. And the last thing I'll say is, I sort of point people often to looking at the auto industry. And people are like, why are we talking about the auto industry? Like, really long product development life cycles like pharma, very regulated like pharma, didn't traditionally have deep tech or digital experience, right? Traditionally speaking, like pharma, controlled by a handful of really big companies like pharma, right? But look at it now. I mean, Tesla's market cap is everybody's combined, right? And for a long time, GM and Ford and Toyota and whoever else were like, oh, these guys are crazy. This is not how our world works from data, digital connectivity, obviously electrification and so forth, right? And now they're all playing catch up. And I'm not saying the exact same thing is going to happen in pharma, but I think it's a very helpful mindset of how do you actually drive disruption versus waiting for somebody else to drive the disruption. And the opportunity is massive for patients and for the companies themselves.
Thanks, Cal. I'm going to share those results and leave them up in front of you for just a second. I want to thank Daphne, Liz, and Cal for joining this chat. I know if you've enjoyed it as much as I have, then I suggest connecting with them via LinkedIn. You'll be able to learn a little bit more about what they do and how they can help you out. I want to thank OptimizeRx for being our partner on this webinar, put together a great chat. And so I want to thank you again for being a part of it with us. That is all the time that we have. As I said, we're going to send through the recording on Monday, so keep an eye out. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Daphne, Lizzie, Cal, once again, thank you very much. All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.